Methylene Blue is an electron donor and has been shown to help people improve depression, anxiety, brain fog, even aches and pains in their bodies. This is what I've been told about it anyway. So I wanted to do a deep dive on methylene blue myself to find out more about the science behind it and if it was just hype. So stay tuned to today's episode to find out more. Welcome back. My name is Sarah. This is the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. And today I'm talking with Dr. Scott from Troscroptions. And we're going to go all into methylene blue, deep dive. Tons of questions. I actually polled my private community before this episode. There's a link to join that community if you're interested in the show notes. But I polled them before we actually started this episode so I could really get their questions about methylene blue. Now, I've actually had several clients taking it over the last 6 months that have reported everything from relief from depression and anxiety to relief from joint pain, better sleep, more energy. That's the biggest one, is the more energy. So I really wanted to investigate this one for myself. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Scott. Now, the link to get the product that Dr. Scott has is in the show notes, and you can use my code Sarah to save on that product. And again, all of these detailed questions that my members asked are linked down there in the show notes. So you can skip through and say, this is a question I have. Let me check the show notes to see if it was asked. Hopefully it was. So thank you again for watching. If you are a fan of the show, please like this video, share it with a friend. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel while you're here. And I want to thank a couple sponsors very quickly before we dive into the episode. The first one is Viva Rays, my go-to source for circadian glasses. If you are not new to my channel, you know how much I emphasize the importance of circadian rhythms for getting your best sleep, having your most energy. So even if you don't want to try something like methylene blue, I believe heavily in using circadian glasses to make sure that your circadian rhythm is as strong as possible. You can use my code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays. And the second sponsor of today's episode is Upgraded Formulas, my go-to source for testing mineral imbalance. Now, if you have a mineral imbalance, you can have anything from hair loss to fatigue to muscle aches and pains, all sorts of things. And essentially, the best way to test for that is going to be a hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation. It's going to show what's been going on in your body for the last 60 to 90 days versus a blood test will just show you what's happening right now. So use my code YOGI12 or YOGI to save at Upgraded Formulas. And let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back and tuning in. I'm really excited to have today's guest on to talk about methylene blue. So Dr. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about you and how you
Sure.
started your company before we get into the basics of methylene blue.
Man, it's the long or the short story, I guess is the question, right? So the short-ish story, I'll try to be brief, is that I'm an internal medicine physician. I grew up the son of a chiropractor, so pretty out of the box, kind of like the OG functional medicine alternative docs back in the 1980s and 90s. So I was getting every diet, every different technology that he could kind of throw in his office at the time. And so I grew up in a very strange way to then become an internal medicine physician, I guess. I thought that there was like this really great high-minded road that I could take where I could bridge the chasm between alternative medicine and conventional medicine and become this doctor that like helped everybody. But over the years, of course, my ideals have remained, although the ways I've decided to do this have shifted over that time frame. And I have a clinical practice that focuses on a foundational approach to health called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. This is also a nonprofit organization that's training doctors and practitioners on how to optimize health rather than treat disease, looking at foundational biomarkers, gut health, exposomics, toxins in your environment. We can go into that if you'd like later. That's what I do from a foundational perspective. And then I have my own clinical practice, which is focused on hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The nonprofit organization is something that I'm very interested in, and I do a lot of work with Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And when we were creating coursework for other doctors and practitioners to really work on optimizing health rather than treating disease, as I was describing, and the sense here is that when you're doing that kind of work, it takes time. Oftentimes, somebody's we often say it took you 40 years to get to where you are. You can't expect that tomorrow you're going to feel better. It's going to take time. It's going to take work. It's going to take foundational types of approaches. And so while that sustainable kind of work is being done, there's things that you need help with right now. You need focus right now. You need mitochondrial support right now. You need stress relief right now. You need anxiety relief right now. And so we came up with a company called Transcriptions. And this company is a company that makes something called the buccal troche, which is these small lozenges that dissolve between your upper cheek and gum over about 15 to 30 minutes. And we wanted to make them for people in our clinical practice is what it comes down to. So pharmaceutical grade, precision dose, and physician formulated. There's 4 docs in the team, including me.
Awesome. So you really just kind of created this company out of wanting to help your patients more and more. And then it's turned into something where you're helping people across the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, we knew that when you're optimizing people's health, it just takes time, and there's all these kind of bumps in the roads, right? So we call it, the path to optimizing your health is littered with garbage. It's just the way it goes. And so there's a lot of foundational things you can do from a lifestyle perspective, which is really important. But at the same time, really looking at data and getting a good sense of what's happening under the hood. And we use something called metabolomics, which is the study of all these kind of real-time metabolites, they're called. They're these real-time cellular things, let's call them cellular processes that are happening all at the same time that you can actually measure. So you can measure how well you're making energy. You can measure how well you're detoxifying. You can measure how well you're making your macronutrients into your micronutrients, how well you are, how well, like how many, your mineral levels, your toxicity levels, and all these kinds of things. You can measure that. You can measure gut health. You can measure markers of circadian rhythm and epigenetics, and you can measure. So what we do is we use this data to support the foundational part of the pyramid, I say, is like of your health, along with lifestyle and diet, of course, that are really important with that. But short story is that in the end, like, you need to focus now. I have a podcast. I need to be on with Sarah. I got to be able to focus. Or I'm really stressed and I need to de-stress right now. I need to have something that lets me bring down my anxiety just a couple points so that I can actually function, or that I can go to sleep. Or I need some mitochondrial support while I'm going through some of this hard work of optimizing my health. And that's the big thing with Methylene Blue, really, is that it's this amazing mitochondrial optimizer.
Yeah. And a good friend of mine kind of explained to me that Methylene Blue is sort of an electron donor, correct? Can we explain that for people who are like, what the heck does that even mean? And why is that a good thing?
Yeah. So it's one of the very few compounds out there that it's called an electron cycler. And so it does donate electrons to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, but at the same time, it picks them back up after you make energy. So when you make ATP, oxygen's your final electron acceptor there, right? That's why we need to breathe oxygen. And when we breathe oxygen, we use that oxygen to make ATP. And that final process there makes ATP, it makes water, it makes carbon dioxide, but it also makes something called free radicals, which are the oxidative stress molecules as we know them. And so in small amounts, these are fine. These are actually really important to help with signaling. They help with what are called epigenetic changes on your DNA. They make your mitochondria function better. And so there's lots of different ways that these can work in small doses. But in larger doses, they can cause inflammation. They can cause, the way to think about it is like rust in the system. The system just doesn't work very well, and electrons get stuck and things get stuck. And so Methylene Blue has this amazing ability not only to build more energy capacity, but also build more resilience in the sense of increasing antioxidant reserve. And some of the studies have shown it's actually as powerful of an antioxidant as things like vitamin C and glutathione. And it's been used in these ways in various types of studies to show that's the case. And it's still on the essential medication list for the World Health Organization as well. And this is because it actually helps with both of these aspects for 2 different conditions that hopefully nobody ever gets. One is carbon monoxide poisoning, and the other one is cyanide poisoning. Because what Methylene Blue does is that it doesn't just donate electrons to the electron transport chain. It actually bypasses the first few complexes of the electron transport chain. So there's 4 total. It actually donates to the 4th protein complex called complex 4, or cytochrome oxidase. And so if your complex 1 and 2 are screwed up for any number of reasons, you can still actually make energy if you have Methylene Blue around, which is super cool. And so this is a lot of people that I work with clinically that have ongoing oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, from anything from chronic inflammatory diseases to post-viral syndromes to autoimmune problems. And if you can just give that support while you're trying to obviously help rebuild those complexes and rebuild the mitochondria itself, with the function being more optimal, then you can see really good benefits in the short term and then even in the long term as well.
Excellent. So for anybody who is like, well, what does that mean for me? Right. I've got, like you said, let's talk about somebody that maybe has like chronic inflammatory
Sure.
syndrome or something like that, or chronic fatigue syndrome. How would they use methylene blue basically to help them, to support them through that process while they're making other changes, essentially?
Essentially, yes, but it doesn't have to just stay there. It can be something that is continually used over time. We
Mm,
don't have any real indications, especially at low dose, and we can talk about what that means. But
yep.
at low dose, you don't really see a toxicity issue,
Mm,
and at higher doses, you do. Even at moderate doses, it can be toxic over time if you're using it because it can build up in the system. And
got
when I
it.
talk about the dosing here, I'm talking about really the kind of sweet spot is probably less than 1 milligram per kilogram per day. And we've even gotten lower than that because some of the studies in the work that we do and or the studies that we looked at that we're looking at specifically nootropic function, so it's like brain function, looked at even less than that, somewhere around 16 milligrams of methylene blue per day. So pretty low dose compared to some of the other products that are out there. But the idea really is when we can come back to that because I know your question was more related to how people are going to feel or how they're going to use this, right? So in essence, mitochondrial dysfunction is almost like the end processes of almost any condition, really.
Any disease. Yeah.
And because we know the mitochondria is so important to make energy, but there's also it's a double-edged sword, right? Because we have mitochondria that make energy, but that energy is not without cost. And that cost is that we do make oxidative load or oxidative stress reactive oxygen species as a result of that. And so if the body doesn't have the ability to support yourself, or you don't have the body doesn't have the ability to have an increase in antioxidant reserve after you're making more energy, or if it's not making energy effectively initially, either way, the system's going to get mucked up. So what methylene blue is able to really do is it really helps support the system. So you're making more energy, you're making more antioxidant reserve. So it's not just one or the other. So that's the thing, oftentimes, especially things that give you more energy are also going to give you more stress in the system. So like a common example for this is caffeine. Caffeine is a great energy booster, but it's also revving up the whole system to make more energy, but it's not giving you any, well, there's some polyphenols and things like that, but in general, it's not giving you an antioxidant reserve, right? The other thing that we use in one of our products is nicotine. When nicotine's a great nootropic, it really does help with brain function, cognition at low doses, not smoked or vaped, but it's also a stimulant. And so if you use stimulants like nicotine or caffeine or Adderall or one of these other like racetams, a lot of different types of stimulants out there, you're going to get a clocking of the system, right? You're going to get a stimulation of the system without also having a supportive part of the system. And this is why at Troscroptions, our company, so Dr. Ted Atracosta is our founder, really smart guy, multiple board certifications, et cetera, like hugely high IQ, much higher than ours by like 16 standard deviations or something ridiculous. But what he really wanted to do when we started this company was let's define nootropics a little bit differently, because we typically have nootropics in like this one category of like brain enhancing supplements. But really what it is you have what we think is three categories. Is the first category would be what we call health optimization nootropics. These are nootropics that support the system, but don't clock it. So they help support the system's biology to work better. So this could be things like taking the amino acid L-tyrosine, which helps with neurotransmitter production, for example. Or it could be something like CBD, which helping with one particular neurotransmitter stick around for a little bit longer. So you have more bliss and more relief of stress and anxiety. This is called anandamide, for example. And then you have another category, which is called performance optimization nootropics. These are the ones that we were just discussing: nicotine, caffeine, Adderall, racetams. The other ones that are stimulating the systems, they're helping the brain perform a task better, but they're not necessarily healthy for the brain.
Right.
And then methylene blue is really cool because, as we've been alluding to, it does both. It helps with you making more energy, but it also gives you that antioxidant reserve at the same time. So whenever you're taking any of these things to help enhance your brain or your performance, it's really important to think about like, where does it kind of fall here, and what is my system prepared for? Like, can I do caffeine, or can I do nicotine, or should I really be thinking about something that's more supportive initially while I'm going through things? If I have chronic fatigue, if I have chronic inflammatory kinds of things, but it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. You could potentially do those things at the same time, but in general, methylene blue is going to be supportive in that whole process.
Yeah. I mean, I've got people using it for all kinds of things like the winter blues. I've had a ton of clients tell me that they've started taking methylene blue just to get through the winter because they live
Mhm.
in like a cloudy, dark, cold sort of a place. And they're like, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have my methylene blue right now. And I'm like, well,
Plus red light. Yeah. Plus some
yeah.
light
And
therapy
oh,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Cruz is the one who kind of turned me on to doing red light and methylene blue at the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's,
It's a fantastic synergy between the two. They're
yeah.
working on the same complex, but just with photons versus electrons kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the combination of red lights or near infrared, so like your light panels that most places are selling these days, along with obviously sunlight if you have
Yeah.
the option for that. So, but yeah, usually what our combination synergy is like, if you have the troche that dissolves in your mouth and you go outside about 15 to 30 minutes later, or you get in the red light and you're over or in front of your red light panel or whatever, like it's really nice synergy as well, for sure.
Nice. So that could help with depression, anxiety. What other kind of things could that help with?
Well, in general, you think about it from the ground up, right? So
Right.
as I keep saying, so what oftentimes if people have brain fog, for example, the reason
Yes.
they're getting brain fog is that because your brain is really hungry for oxygen and
Yes.
really needs a lot of it. It takes about 20% of your entire oxygen supply at any given minute is going to your brain. And when you and I are speaking here, obviously we're even more of that is going because, our brain is more functional, hopefully, depending on the day. So, but the idea is that if you're having brain fog, if you're having issues with fatigue or concentration, then that could be, or focus, this could be related to your mitochondria just not getting enough oxygen or just having more muck in the system in general. And so what can you do there? You can increase your methylene blue intake, right? So that's going to help support your mitochondria and then you start feeling better. So oftentimes when people start taking methylene blue, they feel like their brain fog gets better. They feel like overall inflammation gets better. Like,
Yep.
people tell me that their joints feel better. Like all of a sudden they don't have back pain, which I feel that's very interesting. They also say that their mood does get better. And the reason for that is an additional mechanism of methylene blue. Actually, there's multiple other ones. Additional mechanism is that it's a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which means that it acts like an antidepressant in a mild dose, like a
Okay.
mild antidepressant, because it helps prevent the release, prevent the breakdown of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So as a result of that, you get a little bit of a mood boost. In fact, some of the athletes that I work with just like it for that reason, because they feel like if you run all the time, you get those runner's high, but like if you run all the time, you don't get that anymore.
Right.
So but methylene blue helps you kind of feel that additional boost of just mood wise going up. So in fact, back in the 1950s, the first antipsychotics were derived from methylene blue.
Oh,
Chlorpromazine was the first antipsychotic and was derived from methylene blue.
wow.
And so it's been around a long time. Initially in the beginning, it wasn't used as an antipsychotic. It was used as a way to make sure that people were taking their antipsychotics. Because as you know, when you take methylene blue, it concentrates in your urine. And so as a result of it concentrating in your urine, your urine will be blue. If you've had
Yep.
some B vitamins in the morning, maybe like a neon green, depending on the type of diet you have, it could also change. And also depending on the oxidative stress levels you might have as well. And this is something that I've gotten some questions about recently, and we're kind of doing some work on this. We don't know, like, why is it sometimes you will urinate out tons of blue, and other times you won't urinate out.
I was going to ask you that because
any.
I was wondering if you are urinating a lot of blue, if that means maybe you're taking too much of it. And then if you're not urinating blue, maybe your body is like using more of it. Because a friend of mine, her husband was like repainting their entire bathroom and redesigning and doing all this like construction work with all this toxic paint and chemicals. And he had been peeing blue, and then he was taking methylene blue while he was doing that project. And his pee was like normal color again and
That's
didn't
interesting.
change his dosage at all. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder if his
Well,
body is like utilizing more of it. So I don't know.
you're actually completely on the right track, and that's a great story. So thank you for sharing that,
Yeah.
because that exactly illustrates the point of what you've just described, which is that our feeling is that, so what methylene blue is it picks up electrons, like it helps with inflammatory loads, it helps with oxidative stress. When it does that, when it turns into a reduced form of methylene blue, which basically means it's picking up electrons, it goes colorless. Okay. So when that happens, it's called leukomethylene blue. And so if you are not urinating out a lot of blue, it's likely because the body's under more oxidative stress. It's under more inflammation. It's under more toxicity. And so if you're urinating out like bright blue, that often means that your body's not requiring as much of the methylene blue, and you could probably come down on your dose. And this is also something that you can also navigate depending on what you're doing. I have a colleague of mine that is like does a lot of lifting and training, and then she'll actually titrate her dose to when she's just blue, but not floridly blue kind of deal. And then also when you're traveling and when you're not sleeping as much, and you'll also notice if you're really tuned into this, that your blue coloring will change, and it will just fluctuate depending on what that load looks like. So that's a really good example of what we think is happening, is that the more methylene blue is being reduced, the more that's peeing out colorless. And as a result of that, the more oxidative stress and the more inflammatory load that you're under. So in clinical practice, what I've been doing is, as a result of that, is looking to titrate people's dose to when they start urinating blue. And then like that's probably the dose that they need, at least until different time. Everybody's different in every day, but in general, trying to fluctuate the dose depending on what's needed. But in general, for most people, we find that 8 to 16 milligrams a day, or at least 5 days a week. Some people cycle it, and there's no evidence of going on and off if that's required. But that's really where our health optimization dose is, where you're getting your energy capacity up, you're getting your antioxidant reserve up, you're also boosting those mood enhancing neurotransmitters a little bit. You're helping with the conformation of oxygen on red blood cells so that it gets dumped into your tissues a little bit better. That's another mechanism of methylene blue as well. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It works in so many different ways, but in general, yeah, I think that titrating your dose to what you need, but knowing that if you live in normal society with all the kinds of stress and exposures and toxicity that exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's something that really most of us, I think, can benefit from taking on a regular basis.
Yeah. We talked about before we turned on the recording, that nothing in the podcast is medical advice. And, you have to kind of work with the practitioner and figure out what's right for you. But I've been taking little micro doses of it breastfeeding. And I noticed that my son's going through like the 3-month like sleep regression thing right now, which is the sleep cycles are changing. And so he's just waking up more often. He goes back to sleep, but it's still like, I keep trying to explain to him that I'm 43. And so we need to,
yeah, 3-month-olds will listen. Sure. Yeah.
Like your mother's 43. We need you to start sleeping more again.
Sure.
But
I have good luck with that for another 10 years.
I know, right? It's fine. Yeah. I knew what I was getting into, but
no, it's all good. Yeah.
I've noticed with my dose, like that my urine has been back to like its normal color again. There's like no blue in it. So I'm like, okay, maybe I can go up a tiny bit, because I'm trying to like microdose to the max because I'm breastfeeding.
Right. Yeah.
But I've noticed like since this sleep regression thing's been happening in the last week that the pee is not blue anymore. I'm like,
there you go.
Oh, okay. Well, my body is using it because I'm not sleeping.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So you're under more oxidative stress, when obviously sleep is extremely important to help clear a lot of the toxic stuff in our brain and everywhere else. So yeah, as a company, we usually say that we don't recommend breastfeeding, or if you're pregnant, or if you're taking any SSRI drugs or medications, because the medications potentially can interact with methylene blue because they're both increasing serotonin. Now that interaction would be rare, but these are the major reasons why you potentially would not want to take methylene blue, or at least wouldn't want to do it without the help of your healthcare practitioners as well. So, and then also if you have G6PD deficiency, which is it's a pretty rare blood type disorder where it's mostly in the Mediterranean, and it really only will be an issue if you have like high doses of methylene blue that you're taking, but just something else to consider. But in general, it's a very safe medication. It's been around. It was initially developed as a synthetic to dye blue jeans blue back in the 1850s. And then it became the first drug with the FDA registered in the 1890s for malaria. And at higher doses, it's still used as an antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial. And so I have lots of clients that I work with that are using higher doses with their providers as well, that specialize in things like Lyme disease and some of the co-infections and things like that as well. So there's certainly some synergy there at the higher doses as well. Just the key is that if you're taking anywhere like 1 milligram per kilogram or more on a regular basis, like that potentially can cause some issues that you just have to be aware of. Now, one of the issues could be gut toxicity. So we know that it also can affect biofilms in the gut. So at the higher doses. Lower doses, we don't have any evidence of that. So just
Right.
being mindful that higher doses can affect gut biofilms. Biofilms are the things that sort of the film that's on your teeth. It's also in your intestines that kind of helps protect the intestinal lining, basically. And it's got a sort of ecosystem of bacteria, fungus, virus, mucus, and all those kinds of things kind of hanging out, and hopefully healthy, for most of us,
Yeah.
or some of us. But the other thing that higher dose methylene blue can do is also can cause gastric ulcers. So you'd have to be careful there. And then it's just the other piece of it is just the half-life, to how long it's going to stay in the body. So it does accumulate over time if you're taking an oral dose that's over 1 milligram per kilogram on a daily basis. But in general, very, very lower dosing is not a problem. It's very well tolerated. And then the other issue, of course, is what's called bioavailability, which is how much of the actual compound that you're intaking gets into the system. And for most supplements, like NAC is a great example of this, or even your B vitamins, like it's probably between 10 and 20% bioavailable, which means that whatever you're taking in orally, only maybe 20% of that actually gets into the system. And that's something in a process called first pass metabolism, excuse me, which is something that's it's related to the liver and how it digests various types of things that come out of your digestive system, your intestines and your stomach. And the good thing about methylene blue, though, is that it's almost 100% bioavailable no matter how you take it. You could put it as a troche up here, as we have at our company, or you can swallow it, or you can get it in an IV. I mean, ours is USP, it's medical grade, pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. We don't recommend anybody do that with ours, but because they come in troches, but you can get IV methylene blue these days as well. And there's multiple clinics around the country that are doing that now. This is all since 2020, really, when we launched in June of that year. We had a significant request from our users because we had a product at that point. Our first product that came out was a combination of methylene blue, nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. And this is our product called Blue Canatine. And this is a product that is really for focus, concentration. It's like our nootropic. It's like our, it's something similar to how you would feel on some of these other like limitless kinds of pills, but without a lot of the crash or a lot of the withdrawal or the other major issues, because it's got supportive things in there too, like methylene blue and CBD at the same time as it's got some nicotine and caffeine in there.
Interesting.
However, we did get a lot of people that said, hey, we want something without nicotine, just pure methylene blue. And nicotine's a great nootropic. As I said, people have a bad taste in their mouth from it for obvious reasons. But nicotine on its own has actually been studied in Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment. And it's a fantastic nootropic. And so Blue Canatine for focus, getting shit done for 4 to 6 hours is amazing. And it's something you can do as a targeted kind of thing. But it was the methylene blue orally in the troche form that we came out with in June of 2020 because of people's request, that we were just kind of amazingly surprised at how popular it was and how quickly it became that way. And I think there's a lot of reasons, and we've discussed a lot of those already. But when it comes back to the delivery, as far as the troche versus taking it orally, you can do it both ways. If you have a lot of brain fog, a lot of fatigue, that's sort of concentration related, headaches, then it's better to have it dissolve in your mouth if you can, because that's going to be more focused on brain circulation. The key with troches in general, and that's why we actually developed them, is they're called buccal troches. So they go up here and they dissolve, and actually bypasses that first pass metabolism that I was talking about before. So it goes directly into your circulation, into your brain, and then you get a direct effect and immediately, and within about 15 minutes or so after you start letting it dissolve in your mouth. And so this is the reason why we came up with the troches in the first place, is we wanted to bypass first pass metabolism. So this is important for every one of our ingredients, except for methylene blue, because methylene blue is almost 100% bioavailable, even if you swallow it and it goes past the first pass metabolism in that process. But the troches are very easily swallowed. So depending on the day, I'll swallow them or I'll let them dissolve in my mouth. It just depends on what's going on and things like that. So, but just so people are aware, that's why we use buccal troches. That's what they're called. And they're nice, easy delivery devices. They're very easy to measure. It's very difficult to measure some of those methylene blue liquids out there. And see what you're actually taking and how much. And oftentimes people overdose themselves.
Exactly.
And at least, I mean, it's not dangerous initially, but over the long term, it can be a problem.
Yeah. And could you take one of the troches and actually put it into some water and dissolve it and then just sip it through a straw? Because I've had some people that are like, they don't want to turn their mouth blue and they're they weren't sure if swallowing the troches was a good idea. Would that be a different delivery system than just swallowing it?
It's about the same as swallowing. And
Okay.
if you can dissolve it in water and you can drink it that way, but certainly with a straw. Otherwise, you're going to be looking cyanotic. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which means your lips will turn blue and then you look like you're not getting enough oxygen. But either way, liquid, you can dissolve it that way. You can swallow the troches like a regular capsule, for example. That's what I'll typically do at this point, using the troches for as long as I have. But there's reasons to have it dissolve in your mouth. And the blue canatine, the one that has nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, that one really works well if you dissolve it in your mouth, because you're going to get sort of the immediacy within about 15 minutes or so of the focus, the concentration, the productivity. You're going to feel like your verbal fluency is up. You're going to really feel on it for about 3 to 5 hours or so.
Nice.
Our other product that doesn't have methylene blue, called Trocalm, this is for relaxation, stress reduction. It helps with anxiousness and it helps with stress, really. And it's really great, but it really needs to be dissolved in the mouth, ideally as well. It's got kava, CBD, CBG, which are both non-psychoactive cannabinoids, and GABA as well, something called B3 GABA, which is a really important distinction because most GABA supplements don't really get through the blood-brain barrier. They're very, very poorly bioavailable, as we were talking about before with first pass metabolism. The kava and the CBD and CBG work really well on the GABA system, and they also work on the endocannabinoid system. And then you have the B3 GABA, which is GABA itself, which gets through the blood-brain barrier and helps you relax. So this is in people that have a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, or even have a hard time going to bed at night because their mind's racing. This just quiets those thoughts, quiets your mind, and helps you go to bed. And so that's how I typically use it personally. But with my clients, oftentimes it's people that are trying to wean off various types of prescription medications. And we do this very closely and very carefully under physician supervision, my supervision, being able to come off some of these things like benzodiazepines, for example, like your Xanax, your alprazolams, your Valiums, and things like that. And even on the Adderall side of the world, even though this is challenging, I have had patients that I've been able to wean off using our products. Now, this is me talking as a clinician. This is not me talking as a company. As a result, our company, you always don't want to change any of your medications unless you talk to your healthcare providers. Combining supplements and pharmaceuticals is also something you really need to talk to your providers about too, or do your own research before you make any decisions. I do understand that most of your providers probably have no idea what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And this is a question we get a lot at Transcriptions. And I'm like, look, as a company, you have to do your own research and you have to make your own decisions, just like you are with breastfeeding. And that's totally okay. It's your decision to make. You've done the research. That's your decision, right? But we can't, as a company, give that as a medical claim or advice or anything like that, right? So but in essence, always go back to what we're doing physiologically here, right? We're helping with energy production and we're helping with resilience by giving you antioxidant reserve. Is that going to help you? Okay, that's the question number one. The answer is probably. The second question is, it's safe for me to take? And that's when it's, you're on your own research for you to see. And then I guess the third question maybe is what's the dosing that would be best for me?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest questions that I got from my my private group members, because I've got several of them are taking it now and they're in love with it because I had kind of told them, I'm microdosing it just a tiny bit. I have a practitioner who recommended it to me and she's helping me monitor and make sure that I'm doing it safely for me. And again, if you're breastfeeding, I definitely did not take it pregnant, but if you're breastfeeding and you want to take it, I definitely recommend working with somebody who understands how to use it for sure. But I told my group members, I was like, I'm microdosing with it. It's really kind of helping me. And I've got several of them taking it. So they all sent me a bunch of questions. And that was one of the biggest ones, is like, what dose should people start with and what effects should they expect with that dose?
Yeah. So the way we make the troches is pretty easy. So there are 16 milligram troches. And we did that on purpose because we knew that the top dose for health optimization on a daily basis was probably around 16 milligrams. For most people. However, some people need more when they're first starting, and depending on where they are and what they're doing. And then that's why you can kind of titrate to your urine color, honestly. Is like, if you're taking a quarter dose and you're not seeing a huge amount of blue in your urine, it could be that you need to increase your dose a little bit so that you're getting some of that methylene blue coming out the same way it came in. And you know that you've taken enough to to neutralize the oxidative stress or the inflammatory load in your system at that time. So on average, it's about 8 milligrams to 16 milligrams, depending on the person on a daily basis. Some people take less, some people take more. I mean, I'll certainly take more and I'll have my clients take more when they're traveling, for example, and they're not sleeping as much, or they're on airplanes, because airplanes are low oxygen and you're under radiated fields. And then you have the ability to help increase energy production at the same time as protect you from radiation exposure too, while you're traveling. It's pretty cool. So again, we don't have a lot of great studies there for methylene blue, but at least some ideas. And there's some things in the literature, but the thing about methylene blue, and you'll appreciate this, Sarah, is that nobody gave a shit about it after about 1950, because after about 1950, there was antibiotics, there was antimicrobials, and that's how methylene blue was being used. Back in World War II, people had to take methylene blue with them when they were in the Pacific theater to prevent things like trench foot and fungal infections. But they all had these songs about turning your pee, and at very high doses, it turns all of your secretions blue. So, so there's that. Yes. So, but it really fell out of favor in the 1950s because it did that. And then you had these fancier drugs to do all these kinds of things now. But now, now we know all these amazing things about methylene blue and how it works and how it really does have the ability to optimize in these various ways. And so, but again, it's not, and some pharmaceutical companies are now coming and starting to look at methylene blue again in various types of derivations for things like Alzheimer's disease, for example. And so there's a study that's being done now using something similar to methylene blue. It's a derivation of it, using a very similar dosing that we've been using at Troscroptions for our products. Of course, we don't make any claims in that way, but we've had some great stories over the years of being around as a company, just a couple of years now, almost 3 years, actually, 3 years in February. And so of giving the methylene blue safely to their grandparents or to their parents and seeing them just resurge, like their memory would come back. They would tell stories they haven't told in 50 years. Their energy get better. Their aches and pains, which was strange to me initially, were also getting better too. Like their joints felt better. I mean, it's really interesting because you have mitochondria everywhere except for your red blood cells. And so your mitochondria are sending out signals at all times, help me or don't help me, kind of thing. Do I need more supply? Do I need more help? And they'll send out inflammatory markers. They'll send out things like nitric oxide, for example, is one they'll send out to help with dilation of blood vessels around around the areas that need more help, for example. So if there's more inflammation, there's going to be more dilation as well. So like the mitochondria are always sending out signals, and you have this ability to kind of direct your methylene blue as a result of that to where you need it, which is pretty cool. And I think I forgot the actual question that you asked me. So
I think just what doses people should start with and what should they expect to see when they start using it.
Yeah. So in general, I was just going off on tangent there.
I love it. It's great.
I was like, oh man, where we start here? So again, I think starting off usually at a half of a troche is where I have people typically start, which is at 8 milligrams, and see how they feel. Let's see what happens with their cognition, with some of the symptoms that they've been having, and then titrate your dose from there, depending on, you can see your urine as a marker. I don't think it's like the end all be all. So like if you're like I don't have enough evidence to say like if your urine is colorless or if it's regular color, increase your dose.
Right.
If you feel great and it's colorless, then I don't know if you need to increase your dose. If that's probably fine, right? If you don't, I mean, the idea here really though, it kind of comes back to the beginning of our conversation, Sarah, is the idea that you really want to be optimizing your health and looking at data. So like how well your mitochondria functioning, you can actually test for that. You can look at things like your urine organic acids and see how well is your Krebs cycle working, for example. And so if you get a sense of that, and you get your sense of your antioxidant reserve, and then you can get more of a sense of how methylene blue is going to work for you. And then you can kind of titrate your dosing and also kind of see what you need over time as well, using that data as a way to kind of give you a rudder with all of this too.
Got it. And so a microdose can be effective as well for people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a quarter, a half, a full, and then sometimes even more than a full, when you have more, you have more stress in the system, or you have a bacterial infection or something like that you're also addressing.
Got it. And so it doesn't necessarily time release. It basically works within that first, probably like 3 to 5 hours, would you say?
Yeah. The half-life of methylene blue orally is 4 to 6 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Got
Yeah.
it.
Interestingly, IV methylene blue stays in the system for longer. It stays for 24
Oh,
hours. So just
wow.
be aware if you're taking methylene blue in the IV, you will pee blue for days
I'm
typically. So
sure.
that's
What
typically what people tell me. So
That's interesting.
yeah. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
there's probably some utility to it. But I think overall, especially if you have something acute or something that's really
mm,
significant as a way to kind of help jumpstart the system. But in general, I think it's really more the daily basis of supporting the mitochondria, energy production. But if you've got carbon monoxide poisoning or cyanide poisoning, go get an IV, man. You know,
yeah.
that's gonna save your life. So
I don't know where anybody would get that, but you'd have
oh,
to
there are
fly out
places.
to see. Oh, really?
Oh, there are places. Yeah, there's tons of places in LA.
Oh, wow.
There's a couple places in Florida. I don't know about
Interesting.
Atlanta quite yet, but
Yeah.
there's certainly places that are doing it.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully I won't need anything like
Yeah, no,
that.
I was at a conference in December, and I was talking to a bunch of clinicians that were using it, and just kind of in the IV, just to kind of get a sense and feel. It's pretty low dose typically. It's usually
Mhm.
less than what's in a troche. We're talking about somewhere
Oh,
between
okay.
4 and 10 milligrams. So it's not. They haven't been using high doses. Higher doses would be used for some of the more significant things, and even higher doses than what we've been talking about have been used in people with cancer and in sepsis and profound overwhelming infection and things like that with some success. The
Wow.
deal with methylene blue, though, is at the higher doses, instead of it becoming an electron cycler, which increasing energy, helping with antioxidant reserve, it just creates stress on the system. It just causes oxidative stress. And so in general, you don't want that,
Mm-mm.
except if you're really in a bad place and you need the body to be under more stress so that it actually reacts to something. So like if
Got
you're
it.
septic, for example, which means that your blood pressures go really low if you're in septic shock, the only way you can get that blood pressure up is by giving medications to stimulate the constriction of the blood vessels. And that's really causing, and one way to do that is to actually increase oxidative stress. And so that's why methylene blue seems to work in that capacity if it's needed.
Interesting. Would there ever be a reason for anyone to take like times a day a dose, or probably just once a day? What would you
Well, it
say?
depends. I mean, so if somebody's dealing with something more inflammatory and they're more on the acute side of life, then I usually would start with higher dosing. Sometimes we'll
Mm,
do a quarter, a half, 3 times a day, up to, I mean, it really depends. I mean, our troches are low dose, as I said. So
mhm.
even if you took 4 full troches in a full day, that's 16 times 4, right? 64. So it's not a huge amount. That's about 1 milligram per kilogram for like a small person. So in general, in people that are really like suffering, or if they're having an acute issue, like an acute viral syndrome or acute post-viral kind of thing, that they really need the extra support, what I'll do sometimes is we'll do a quarter to a half, 3 to 4 times a day to start off with people. And I've had additional, this is on the clinical side, of course, I'm talking here. Like I've had people that will use it in their mouth on certain parts of the day when they need more cognitive function. And then they'll actually swallow it when they need to have more, because obviously you have a lot of mitochondria in your liver and in your
Yeah.
heart and these areas that need support too. And they find that they sleep better when they take methylene blue
Oh,
before bed
really?
because they're getting more recovery when they're using it at night when they swallow it, for example. So if
Interesting.
in a buccal troche in the mouth, you're going to get more of the neurologic
Brain.
nootropic effect, brain effect. It's going to get everywhere, but it's going to focus there because that's where it's getting dissolved. But if you take it orally and you swallow it, it's more of a systemic effect, and it'll kind of go where you need it to go, where you have your most mitochondria. And then the place that I left off that has the most mitochondria that is very important is obviously your muscle tissue too. And so
Hmm.
we're using it in people that are looking at endurance, like endurance athletes, for example, and just with work of exercise and things like that, and helping giving you a bit of a boost there too. Not only the mood boost that we talked about, but also the energy boost as well, because your mitochondria are the most, your muscles have the most mitochondria per cell than any other cell in your body.
Yep. Absolutely. So it can be a great performance enhancer as well, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Blood flow is the key, and
Awesome.
oxygen and energy production, they all go together. So
Yeah. And then one of my group members, I'm so proud of her for asking this question,
mm,
because she understands the importance of, sunlight. She's like, in the winter time, I get less sunlight. I don't have the ability to ground. I think she lives up in Canada where it's snowing all the time.
sure.
She says, should my dose of blue be higher in the winter time when I don't have access to like those same kind of quantum
Sure.
inputs?
Possibly. Yeah. And again, this is something that she has to kind of feel out with
Mm,
how she feels, maybe the urine being a marker, but also doing some data analysis, and you can kind of see how her mitochondria are really functioning, and kind of get a sense of how much more support she'll need that way might be helpful too. There's other ways you can kind of do these things. Obviously, you can try to find more objective measures of how you're feeling, depending on what those symptoms are directed at. For example, like, so if it's neurologic things, you can there's lots of neurologic tests you can try online and kind of just see. Some of them are for more like brain injury or for stroke or things like that, but they can give you a sense of your visual spatial recognition, your hand to eye contact, and was a hand to eye? Yeah, hand to eye. Yeah, that didn't sound right. What am I saying wrong there? Something wrong there. But your coordination, basically.
Yes.
Those kinds of things too. So you can test all these kinds of things. And I work with a bunch of providers, clinicians that are using methylene blue in combination with other types of therapy, right? They not only red light, but they're also doing it in the setting of doing, chiropractic or doing physical therapy or doing, or having a functional medicine practice and doing the laboratory testing too. So it's a great integrator. It's really not mutually exclusive to almost anything else that you would do, as long as you don't have one of those contraindications. So,
yeah, that was the next question. Is someone wanted to know if there was something that they could take that would mitigate the effects, like if there's any supplements that would kind of not make it as effective. I've got a lot of them drinking hydrogen tablets. So they're like, is it okay to take with my hydrogen? Is it okay to drink with my coffee?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We really don't have any major knowledge about this, in the sense that we just think about what's going on basic physiologically. Like, the one thing that I do warn people against, and I'm sure you do this as well, is that you don't want to take too many antioxidants in general, right? Because you need to have enough, but not too much, because these antioxidants, not only can they create more stress on the system because they have the ability to turn into oxidative molecules if there's too much of them around, especially something like CoQ10, for example. But there's also the other aspect of it is downregulating your own production, or your body can't make as much of them if you're taking too many. So I'm always a little bit wary of people taking things without kind of having a good understanding of what their oxidative stress levels and vitamin minerals and levels and those things are together, so that at least you get a sense of what you need and you take what you need, not only what you think you might need, for example. But methylene blue really shouldn't have much of an effect. It really shouldn't be mitigated as far as those kinds of stimuli. I think the only things that would potentially make methylene blue not as effective is anything that was going to be detrimental to your complex 4 or to your energy metabolism, which would be detrimental to you in general. So I wouldn't recommend those things. So it can go with your caffeine, it can go with your hydrogen tablets, it can go with really almost anything, because it's really kind of a supportive, especially at the lower doses. Now, if you get on the higher dosing side of things, then you have to be a little bit more careful. But certainly on the lower doses, what we're talking about, I don't think it should be an issue.
Yeah. And the medication that you said people should exercise caution with would be an SSRI.
Yes.
Right.
Any medications, of course, talk to your healthcare provider. Right.
Definitely.
But yes, SSRIs or any drugs that are increasing serotonin in the neurotransmitter system, so increasing it in the synapse. So that's the new classes of antidepressants as well. These are called the SNRIs, things like Effexor and Prosteq and a couple of ones like this. And then also, and Cymbalta and Lexapro, those are all ones that fall into that category. And then there's the SSRIs, which are the ones that have been around forever, like your Paxils and Zolofts and sertraline and Celexa and things like that. So those are the ones you want to avoid. Now, technically, like, the only studies that have looked at this as being a problem are really high doses of methylene blue and really high doses of SSRIs. So most likely people will be like, the risk is very low, but even if that's the case, as a company, we have to say, we don't recommend combining them together unless you talk to your healthcare practitioner and they feel differently.
Got it. So thyroid medications, HRT, those things don't really necessarily interact with the serotonin.
No, that's a good point. No, they don't, but usually they don't. But you have to go, like, individual medications, you have to kind of take a look and see what exactly you're taking. However, you did make a good point here, which I forgot to mention, is that it does increase metabolic rate. And so as a result of that, we have had users tell us that they need less thyroid medication, for example, because their thyroid is working at a better clip with methylene blue around. So if you have, it's something just to be aware of. It is going to increase your metabolic rate. And so that may make you feel hungrier at times. I find that when I'm taking higher doses of methylene blue, I'm hungrier for sure. And because your body is, so what's happening is, like, you're basically giving the body a whole much more electrons, you're making a whole bunch more energy, and then the body thinks that you need to make more of the substrate, so you got to break down glucose from glycolysis and go into your electron transport chain from your Krebs cycle and make more energy. So like the whole thing's like, oh shit, this dude or dudette needs more food so that they have more substrate. Now, of course, that could be keto as well if you're ketogenic.
Right.
And
I have a lot of keto
fat.
people.
Yeah, you can break down fat. It's the same thing, but people will tend to get hungrier if they have higher doses of methylene blue for that reason, because the body is breaking down more glucose so that you can make more energy.
Okay. So it could be, because that was another question that I had personally was, what about people who are really stalled out and stuck with weight loss? Could methylene blue be something that's supportive of weight loss?
Yeah, I think in a couple different ways. I mean, there's no studies here, so I don't know for sure.
Right.
But in general, it's going to increase metabolic rate, as we described. And it's also going to help with inflammation. And the oxidative stress. And we all know that fat cells, they store a lot of inflammatory markers and inflammatory chemicals. And so detoxing from those is really important as well. And so methylene blue in that case may be helpful. I don't have a lot of experience working with anybody in this capacity, but certainly I think it could be supportive.
Got it. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people that kind of go on these crazy weight loss diets and they end up after a couple of weeks getting really, really sick. And they're like, why am I sick right now? I'm like, because your fat cells have a lot of toxicity.
Just dumped out all that stuff into circulation.
Dumped it. Yeah. So you're sick. So that makes a lot of sense. And is there anyone who really, like we discussed pregnancy, who should not take methylene blue? If someone's liver is functioning suboptimally, would it put too much strain on it to take methylene blue?
Well, the good thing about methylene blue is that it's supportive. I don't think liver issues. I mean, I have to look at the data on actual people that have liver failure. So if you have liver failure, please talk to your doctor. If you have like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in significant amounts, or if you're a cirrhotic because of alcohol, I would watch out for anything. I don't believe that methylene blue would be an issue, but I would really have to look into that data to be clear. But in general, for most of the population, 99% of people, I don't think that's really much of an issue when it comes to liver issues specifically, as long as they're not something that's clinical, that's requiring medication or a significant diagnosis per se. But in essence, it's a really safe drug. It's been around forever, and it's the safety data has been around for over 100 years, and so we know that it's got this great safety profile even at higher doses. If it's done intermittently, and now with the lower dosing, we have really good confidence that it's very safe. And there's a pretty cool researcher, for those that are listening, if you guys really want to get into the weeds of some of this, his name is Francisco Gonzalez Lima, and he's at the University of Texas in Austin. And he does a lot of work on Alzheimer's models using methylene blue as the substrate to help reverse or mitigate these kinds of models of cognitive impairment. And really amazing work. And he's also done some published studies on red light therapy and how the combination is potentially very synergistic, as we discussed before. So there are people that are working on this. The challenge, as we were discussing earlier too, though, is that nobody cares about an off-patent drug that you can get over the counter and you can get from a company like ours that you can get it online. I mean, you have to be careful with your methylene blue source. Just be aware of that too, that methylene blue out there is very commonly contaminated with heavy metals. Mercury, nickel, cadmium, and arsenic are the ones that typically get contaminated, and even in USP sources, even in good sources. So you really want to get that kind of data from the companies that you're using. So we do a couple of things. We get USP grade, which is the highest grade you can get of a product, and that's the pharmaceutical grade. And then we test it again ourselves. There was a third party that tested it from the manufacturer, and then we do a third party again. So what, like fourth party or whatever, ourselves. So we make sure that it's every batch that we get is clean and that it's what we're getting. And it took us 9 months to launch our company because we were looking for a good source initially. Methylene blue, it took a long time to find one. So just be aware when you're looking at methylene blue sources, USP may not be enough. If it is USP, at least make them send you their purity and their potency data. We have all that at our company, and that's something that we care about a lot with each of our batches that we use. So that's just one thing to consider when you're looking at methylene blue. As far as the safety of it too, is just making sure you're getting a good source of it when you're using it.
Yeah. And my question about the other part about safety would be the toxicity that you mentioned a few times. Is there a sign, or is there a way that someone would know that they're taking too much and that it's starting to build up and creating a situation like that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So it really depends on the person. Oftentimes it will be, it could be pretty subtle, but it could be more like the reasons that you're taking the methylene blue, you're having sort of regression of those symptoms. If you're having any regression, that could mean that that's too much oxidative stress or too much stress in the system from methylene blue. If you're noticing any GI discomfort, any GI issues, whether it be kind of upper GI in the sense of like ulcerations or inflammation in the stomach from taking methylene blue at higher doses, or if you're having changing your bowel habits, if you're seeing things change in that capacity, that could be also signs that you're taking too much.
Got it. Okay. So everybody work with your practitioner and
Right.
and don't go overboard. Don't be like me. It's like what I am with most of my biohacking stuff is I have to like overdo it before I realize that I've overdone it. This is one of those things you got to be really careful with so that you're not just like slamming the methylene blue. There's not really a need to take the high doses, is there?
I mean, unless there's an acute need, like
Yeah.
I said, like I have people that are coming through an acute condition and they need higher doses that they can take 3 to 4 times a day, just to kind of get through what's going on, helping with inflammation, with energy production. And as long as they're supporting the system in other ways, they can be just fine. I mean, even when you're traveling, if you're getting on an airplane, for example, like you need more methylene blue, I would think, because from your regular dosing, because you're going to be under more oxidative stress at those altitudes when you're flying, because you're pressurized to somewhere around 8,000 feet above sea level, which is around 15 or 16% oxygen or so. So it's less than 21% where you're typically hanging out. You know, me in Colorado, I'm typically around that. So I'm okay. But for most people that are traveling, aside from the radiation, there's that, right? So
exactly.
Although I do have radon on the ground here, but that's another story. But
wow.
It is radon all over Colorado. So you have to get like radon protected homes and mitigation things. Yeah. So
oh, wow.
Yeah. But long story short is that when you're on an airplane, you're at a higher oxidative stress level because of radiation and less oxygen. And so if we can give you some extra support there for travel, I think it's a really great, since people are now doing more traveling and everything. And then again, in the post-viral world that we live in, I've had a lot of success clinically using this product as a way to help with brain fog and fatigue and the other kinds of symptoms that might be associated. But that's on the clinical side, of course. No claims.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing. Continue to work with somebody. If you have one of these more chronic issues, keep working with your practitioner. Don't try to DIY this stuff, but this can be something that is supportive of healing. And maybe do you have a list of practitioners that use this, or ones that you recommend, or just,
do you want to start one? We don't have one. Yeah. I don't have
helpful. Yeah,
that's something that I hadn't thought about. Actually, it's a good idea to have a list of people that are using methylene blue. I mean, what I can say is that, we do have practitioners all over the US and actually over in some countries as well in the UK that are using our products in their clinical practice as a way to support their patients. And so we have, if there's anybody that's listening that is a clinician that would love to have these products in their office, that's one of the areas of our company that I run, which is our wholesale practitioner side. So I do education on methylene blue, for example, or some of our other products and our ingredients. And we have webinars, and we have obviously discounts if you're buying them for your office, so you can have them in your office to sell to your patients and things like that. So so we would definitely have clinicians that are using methylene blue that's from us all over the country for sure. But we don't have a list of those people, which is interesting. So I like that idea.
Yeah, you should have a list people can use. You know, we have a practitioner here that's working with my daughter. We talked about this before I hit the recording.
Yeah.
You know, she's got non-speaking autism. She's brilliant, of course, but we did some interesting genetic testing with this company called Genimind. I don't know if you've ever used them before. It's really interesting. And found out that she actually makes about half the normal amount of dopamine that a normal person makes, which made a lot of sense because she's constantly like getting into trouble. Like she's constantly asking for, sweets and getting into trouble. And we don't allow that kind of stuff in the house. And so that was one of the things the practitioner recommended for her, was trying some methylene blue to see if it would help her with this kind of like always looking for some sort of like dopamine hit. And
interesting.
Yeah. And it's actually really helped a lot. And she loves it. She likes to take it before we do this spelling to communicate. So she wants to write a book. Like she writes poetry. She does all this amazing stuff, but she always asks if she can take the methylene blue, like before we do letterboarding or before we do, she likes to do it with red light therapy too, which is, she just kind of intuitively wanted to do that. I'm like, okay.
That's awesome. So she'll take the methylene blue and then she'll want to do some of her writing.
She'll want to write, or she'll want to do red light therapy. Those are the two
awesome.
things she likes to do with the methylene blue. So
that's very intuitive of her. That's beautiful.
It is. Yeah. And I didn't know any of that until speaking with you. It was just recommended to me by the practitioner. So I'm like,
what kind of book does she want to write, out of curiosity? Does she know?
She just loves to write poetry.
Okay,
And so
that's
probably just
beautiful.
a book of her poetry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really nice to hear that. I mean, it really, what do you find is if you have further to go, you're going to see more of a difference in general, in the
Yeah.
sense that,
Yeah.
and I don't mean that in a bad way here, just in the sense that, like, if you're, really sick and fatigued and you're really having a lot of issues, this can be a big game changer for you.
Yeah.
It may not be, but it very well could be. And there's very low risk and very little downside to it. Now, one thing we didn't talk about, there are some people, it's pretty rare, but there's some people that take methylene blue and feel worse. And
Yes. Yeah.
and this is an interesting subset of people that have, typically it's really significant detoxification kinds of issues. Like
Mm.
they're under a lot of oxidative stress already, and their body just doesn't have the capacity to rev up energy production at all. So even if methylene blue is increasing antioxidant reserve, these people can't even tolerate that because their mitochondria are so under so much stress already. So, and so I've had people start off with 1/8 of a troche before, and then maybe go to 1/4 after that, after a little while, just to kind of build up to make sure that if you're one of those people listening that are super sensitive to everything, you're super sensitive to chemicals and to smells and to mold and to everything that under the sun. And, it's a huge challenge. But this can help you, but I would just start off at a very, very small dose, at a very small dose, obviously with consultation with your providers, et cetera. But I would start at a very small dose and work up from there. Because I've had people that have started off with like 1/8 of a troche, like just cutting a fourth into 1/8 and just doing that for a couple weeks or even month before they would even go up to a quarter, that they could tolerate it. So it's a very small subset of people, but I should mention it, just because we do see that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, when I talked about it in my Instagram stories a couple of weeks ago, actually I had somebody that messaged me and said, I wish I had never taken it. It made me feel even more crazy and caused me to feel really too hyper. And I'm like, did you take the one with the nicotine in it? And they're like, no, I just took the plain one. So I wonder if they kind of fall into that subset of people who just really need a very, very tiny dose.
Right, exactly. And then it's on the mental health side of stuff, you have to be careful too, right? If people are taking the antidepressants, it's also going to have mood changes or mood boosting effects. And that also it just can be hard to navigate for people, right? So so it's just something to be aware of. Like, you want to take these things with the help of your providers, especially if you're on medications, especially if you're going through a lot of medical issues right now. You just want to, it's something that could be helpful, but you just make sure it's being used in a very intentional and very low way. Like, you certainly I would be very careful with like droppers and things like that with these kinds of people, because like they get into a lot of trouble. And so it's very rare that anything happens, but again, these things, we do see this happen. It's something that is important to mention. So
yeah. And then, what about if someone doesn't feel anything from it? Do you ever see that?
So yeah, I mean, so oftentimes it's usually for people that are pretty well optimized overall. They may just feel a subtle rise in how they feel. It may not be dramatic. It may just be like, oh, I feel a little bit more energy. I feel a little bit less tired in the middle of the day. I feel a little bit more focused. It's not, we call it a wide focus. So in people that are relatively well optimized, like, it's a wide focus. Like, you feel like you can focus, but it's not so much like your tunnel vision, or you're like on like our blue Nicotine, which really helps you kind of focus and be productive and like get shit done. This is more like you're open, but you're more like elevated is what I call it. So you're not stimulated like if you were taking a lot of caffeine or something, or drinking caffeine. Like, that's a stimulated feeling. This is more of an elevated feeling. That's how I would describe it. I think that's like about half of our users, really, is like, it's not like a gigantic energy burst. It's not like something dramatic, like their joint pain goes away and then their headaches are gone and their brain fog is better. Like, that does happen, but like, half the people that take it are taking it more from like the health optimization perspective, where it's almost like you're taking your daily multivitamin, right? Where you're not feeling something from your multivitamin, but you're taking it because you know that it's helping you in the ways that it's supposed to help you, kind of deal.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then I think the only question I didn't get to was children and methylene blue. Now, obviously my daughter's 15 and we're working with a practitioner, so that's, throwing that caveat out there. But as a clinician, do you ever use it with kids or recommend it to any children?
So yeah, as a company, we don't recommend anybody buy it that's less than 18 years of age. Okay. However, in clinical practice, methylene blue is being used, and it's been used for over 100 years, as I mentioned, in babies to elderly people. And so it's very safe. The dose is really just the key to kind of titrate that. And there's not a lot of data there. Typically it's been used more in the setting of bacterial infection, for example, or things like, not from a health optimization perspective, like how your daughter is using it. That's an amazing story, but it's not something that we have any data to support using per se. I mean, number one, it's not great to study kids. It's not really fun to do those kinds of studies. And number two, it's just like the methylene blue itself hasn't been used from a nootropic neurologic perspective really up until the last couple of years, maybe the last decade, really. I mean, but really only in the last several years has there become any knowledge of this outside of a very small core biohacker community, really. But in general, in kids, we think it's safe. The question is just dosing and working with your provider that make sure that it's not interacting with any other medications. But kids tend to be more sensitive to these things too. So like you'll notice that she'll likely be more sensitive to a dose than you will be. So if it's like, if you're good at a half, she might be good at a quarter, or maybe at like an eighth or something. We
started her at an eighth. And then she asked if we could keep increasing it. Like she's up to a full troche now, but it was because she 15. Asked. She's 15 and she is as big as I am.
Right. Exactly. So, she's not a little kid anymore. Yeah.
No, she's not tiny. But the only reason we increase it is because she asked. And then there's, we don't take it every single day for her. We give her days off and kind of cycle it in and out. And even when she cycled it out, there'll be days where I'm like, do you want it? And she's like, no.
Interesting.
So
she's very intuitive. Yeah.
She's very intuitive. I tend to listen to her she's crazy about only wanting to drink structured water now. And I don't think it's because I was doing it. I think she just really notices how
she knows how it feels. Yeah.
Yeah. She likes to drink the hydrogen structure. We just got a spring aqua system and she's awesome. She's obsessed with it. I'm like, okay, well, she knows like she's not going to drink the other water. She only wants that one. So
she's your intuitive person in the house. Like, should we eat this food or should we not eat this
food? Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, given how the verbal aspects of her challenges, it's like she's become so intuitive in so many different ways. And that's super cool, I'm sure, as a parent, to be able to see and be able to cultivate and to know that you should be drinking structured water as much as possible too.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Well, is there anything that I didn't cover that you think my audience would find really interesting about methylene blue?
This has been a pretty deep dive overall with what we've talked about. I think we've hit most of the major points that I can really think about. You did a really nice job asking all the questions. And I think we dove into some points that I don't tend to make as much, like the elevated metabolic rate. That's something that we do see, but it's actually relatively common, but it's not usually the case for somebody. Well, it's somebody that needs to change anything about anything that they're doing. It's like, oh, I feel more up. And like, that's the elevation that people feel, right? It's the elevation of that metabolic rate a little bit. So, but it's something that if you're taking medications that are metabolically active, like you may not it's something you just want to monitor with your providers, but you may not need as much of them, for example, like something like a thyroid medication or something like that. No, but I think we covered most topics. I think the other piece that I kind of alluded to is that we do have one other product, which I think is fantastic, that doesn't have methylene blue, but it's called Trocalm. And that's our product with stress relief, anxiety reduction. It really does just take the edge off. And the nice thing about it is it's titratable, just like the other products, where you can start off with a quarter or a half or a full. A quarter is great if you have stress during the day and you just want to take the edge off without feeling sleepy. It just kind of takes that sympathetic dominance down just a little bit, so you feel like your brain can actually function. It's the common scenario of like, you have a talk to give, you're in front of 100 people and you forget all the words that you were going to say, or because your mind is completely sympathetic dominant, your stress mode, you're like, oh God, fight or flight, right? And so like, if you can come down just a little bit on the fight or flight, it tends to make you feel like you can actually, give your talk and have your presentation or be in front of. This even helps with people with social anxiety and things like that too, that don't feel comfortable being around people, that kind of thing.
And that has GABA in it as well, right?
Yes, it's got GABA, a B3 GABA. So it's a very highly permeable type of GABA.
Okay.
So it gets in and helps with the GABA system. And then there's CBD and CBG, which are non-psychoactive cannabinoids. Everybody knows CBD already, but CBG is a newer one. It's a lower amount in the plant, but non-psychoactive. It helps with pain and temperature control, and also works with metabolic rates as well. And so it seems to have multiple ways of helping. It's actually my favorite cannabinoid, if I had to choose one, CBG. There's a lot more sleep formulas out there that are combining CBD and CBG together for this reason, actually. And also for pain, it's very interesting as well. So, and then there's also the kava in there. So kava is is a plant from the Pacific Islands in the
Yeah.
South Pacific, and it's also increasing GABA in the brain as well. So in higher doses, GABA can make you feel like you're drunk, like alcohol,
Yeah.
because alcohol is also a GABAergic drug. It's also working on GABA, but they work at different binding sites and different affinities, and it's much safer. Kava doesn't have the tolerance withdrawal or any other kinds of things that happen with alcohol. People don't need to be drinking alcohol for any reason, as far as I'm concerned at this point.
I agree.
But if you like it, just, I wouldn't combine it with this particular product is what it comes down to as well. So, but yeah, really great for people also that have a hard time falling asleep at night because their mind is racing. And this is me, going 24/7 with everything and the 4 kids at home and trying to do my 2 hours of work when everybody goes to sleep.
Clinical.
So,
and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my routine is, depending on the day, a little bit of Trocalm, sauna, bedtime, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but so it really help with the wind down process too.
Very cool. Well, this has been such an interesting conversation. I'm really excited to share it with everybody. Obviously, I'll have links down in the show notes if anyone wants to go ahead and order these products.
Yeah, we'll get you an affiliate link so people can click
Yeah.
that and get a discount on their products too.
Awesome.
For sure.
And what's the best way if people want to follow you, follow the company? How can they do that?
Sure. Yeah. So our company is called Troscriptions. It's the word troche and the word prescription mashed up together. And the word is Troscriptions, and it's at Troscriptions on Instagram. You can find us at troscriptions.com as well. My personal Instagram is at Dr Scott Sherr, the word, my name, but the letters DrScottSherr in front of them. And you can get some information about me and my clinical practice and how I use all these things and my foundational work. The nonprofit organization as well is called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And this is homehope.org, at homehope.org on Instagram as well, I believe. And so that's where we do a lot of our education for practitioners, and the foundational practice that I use before I use almost anything, maybe except for Methylene Blue on my clients, is to do a foundational assessment with people before getting them on vitamins, minerals, and nutrients and supplements and things like that. So
awesome. Well, I'll make sure I link all that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you again for being here today.
my pleasure, Sarah. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. Yes.